Welcome to the RAC Horizons podcast. I'm Mike Bartlett. Now, the Round Australia drive has long been on most Australians' bucket list. But, of course, the world of the road trip is rapidly changing. We're seeing more and more EVs on the road. But are we ready to take to the road for the long haul without using the fuel pump? Going to be talking with a family that did just that. The McLennan family decided to find out and in 2024 set out on their big lap to circumnavigate Australia, towing a caravan with their EV. Tim, Renee, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Now, I recently purchased an EV, and when I tell people that we've got an electric vehicle, I can see this sense of panic, this sort of fear rise on their faces, and they'll say things like, but surely it's not entirely electric, is it? I mean, you must use petrol just a bit. We'll talk later about the range anxiety, the stress that can come with owning an EV. But given that fear about getting out onto the open road with an EV, why did you want to drive around Australia?
We have had a range of cars over recent years. We went from the standard petrol vehicle about 10 years ago, and then we moved on to a hybrid. So we had about 50 k's electric range and then your petrol backup. And then in more recent years, we'd moved to fully electric. So we'd already experienced the benefits of having an EV, and that was both financial. We weren't spending money at the petrol station. We were charging our car from our rooftop solar, but also it was about doing something that had less impact on the planet. So if we were able to do our lap and minimise the amount of carbon that we were producing, then that was a really important thing for us. And we knew that there was a bit of a perception in Australia that EVs weren't up to the job, particularly outside of the city. We knew that things were changing in terms of infrastructure, and when we had a look at whether it was possible, we decided that it was. So we thought it was a great opportunity to demonstrate what already could be done in Australia, even with the limited infrastructure that we currently have. Okay,
and whose idea was it, Tim? Was it your idea?
Like most of the things we do, I think it was very much a team effort to come up with this at the point. I got to do this trip around Australia in a caravan with my family when I was 11, the same as my daughter is now.
Right.
And so when my long service leave came up, Renee and I discussed what are we going to do with it and thought this is a good opportunity to do exactly what I got to do as a kid. Renee mentions that I've often spoke warmly about that kind of trip and all the memories that it created. And so we went, well, yeah, maybe we do that trip to give our kids the same experience. And as Renee said, because the fact that we'd already gone down the path of EVs and really liked the way that was going, and the point of travelling around Australia is to see all this beautiful nature, untouched scenery, we wanted to be able to show our kids that and not contribute to the fact that all of that is disappearing. So why not help kickstart the EV travel side of things to ensure that that's around for their kids?
I think it is something that many of us did experience as a kid. Certainly I have fond memories of driving around Australia with my family. I'm interested in whether your children sort of gave you a new lens to look at that trip, and I think you talked about that a bit there, Tim. And I know that one of the reasons that we got an EV was I just would look at the kids in the back seat as I was filling up our petrol car every week, and I started to feel kind of complicit that I was setting a bad example. I mean, was that a driving factor for the two of you?
Yeah, I'm sure that plays into sort of the back of our minds that we're aware of the kind of trajectory that if we don't make a change, where we're likely to head, and it's not somewhere that we want our kids to end up. So somebody's got to make a change at some point, and we thought, even if it's going to be a little bit of effort, let's see if we can do this trip fully electric and prove what we think is going to be possible.
I guess like you know, we've got young kids and you want to do a good job of being a parent. And part of that is about, we worry about their education and their health, but we also need to think about the world that they're going to have to live in as they grow up and have their own children. And, look, we know there's challenges. So if we can help to move in a direction where we are going to have a healthier environment for them, then that's something that's really important to Tim and I. So that was a big part of it for me.
Okay.
And I think related to that, as a parent, we're trying to model doing the right thing to show them by example. And one of the things is making less of a negative impact on the world as we go about it. But the other one is not shying away from a little bit of a challenge. Everybody else does it the normal way. But if we're going to do this trip, why not do something a little bit different? And if it might be a little bit hard, you learn along the way. So let's go.
I look back to when I was a little girl, and nature and the environment was always really important to me. Like I have this really strong memory of when I was little and we were driving through the city at night, and I was in the back seat of the car and looking at all of the high-rise buildings at night, and they were all lit up because, they were vacant or they were empty, but they still had all the lights on. And even as a really young girl, that really upset me that we were sort of wasting all of these natural resources when it was unnecessary. And as I went through my schooling and my high school, I had lots of opportunities, like it sounds like we all had as children, where we would go out camping, and I grew up in a sort of semi-rural environment, and being down at the river and amongst the trees was just part of my experience. And I always wanted to work with endangered species. So I got to the end of high school. I had great grades, so I could do whatever I wanted, and my preferences for university courses were all environmental science at the 4 different universities that were there at the time. And just at the last minute, I had a conversation with a lecturer at one of the universities, and he completely discouraged me from going down that path. And at the last minute,
Really?
he told me that if I did environmental science, I'd spend my days testing algae in swamps. And that wasn't exactly what I had imagined for my life. But it was interesting. That one conversation really changed the trajectory of my life. And I ended up studying physiotherapy instead. And I didn't really know what that was. And luckily, it was a great career that allowed me to meet fantastic people and make a difference. But it kind of complemented that innate desire to look after the health of, in this case, people, but also our environment. And those things really came together for me when I had our first child. And that's when I put my hand up for our local council. And for me, that was about wanting to play a part in building a positive future for the community that our kids would grow up in.
And Tim, what's your key moment of motivation, do you think?
I think mine is the background behind me is more from the electrical engineer, computer interest, gizmos and gadgets. That sort of got me into the EV and electrical scene and efficiency of housing, energy use and those kind of things. So it's more of a techno-gadget sort of thing.
Yeah.
But I guess instilled with the saying which I got from my parents, which is stuck, which is their plan, which is also my plan, is to leave the world a better place than what you were brought into it. So matching those two up, playing around with EVs and electrification of the house to reduce carbon footprints is
Excellent.
how I got involved.
A good fit.
And there were lots of comments that we sort of noticed on social media and general discussions that we had when we were doing this planning, that people said, no, it can't be done. And we say, well, prove that it can't. They go, oh, we can't. And there were other people who said, yeah, it should be able to be done. And we said, well, who's done it? And neither of those had an answer. So we thought the only way to do it is to make sure that we're pretty sure it can be done and then just do it, because there's no other way of proving it until it's done.
So you were pretty sure, but did you know it could be done, or were you hoping it could be done?
I would say we put plenty of planning effort in, and we had backup plan B and C and all those kind of things.
Yeah.
Luckily, didn't have to use the vast majority of them. So we actually had numerous backup strategies that we didn't have to use. So I think that in itself gave us enough confidence that it should be able to be done. It just, we weren't quite sure of how smooth it would go.
This big lap, I mean, what is the total distance that you travelled going around Australia?
The plan to do 16,000, but by the time we ended up getting home, the odometer showed just over 37,000 kilometres. So we could have actually done the lap twice, with still more to go, with all the side trips and the exploration we did off the path.
Yeah, because we weren't really interested in just driving around the highway. That's not a great family
Sure.
trip.
No, absolutely.
The good stuff is all off the highways, and so that's where we really wanted to go, and to take the kids and spend nights under the stars away from the main roads, and they were really the great parts of the trip.
Right. Because I think that's often where the range anxiety kicks in, isn't it? And it's probably worth defining that term, range anxiety being the panic that you're not going to make it to the next charge station before your EV conks out. But you were able to still have a fairly fluid experience, fairly flexible be fairly flexible with your travel plans.
Probably more so than we expected. We did find that the whole experience was less onerous in terms of planning. We had more options once we got out there. found that there were more charging options that you didn't realise until you got there. Yeah, if you think about the range that you've got for getting from one point to another, if you get to that point, you've then got that same range going sideways, halfway, and then back again.
Mm-hmm.
So it just opens up all sorts of options for travel, as long as you're not rushed. That's the big key.
Okay. And let's talk a bit more about that planning. I mean, you said it wasn't too onerous, but a very rigorous planning process went into this, I imagine. Were there places you had to rule out straight away because the charging options simply weren't there?
Maybe if you go that real hardcore, like the middle of the Simpson Desert or the Tanami or something like that. But that said, if you really wanted to do them, there are options. There are people pushing those kind of boundaries. And we've had people go straight from Kalgoorlie through to Uluru through that path. Towing a caravan adds yet another level of complexity and reduced range, so that would change options again. But you've kind of got the same problem where if you want to do a diesel trip, there's plenty of places that you might like to go that you have to plan in advance for getting diesel drop-offs or something like that. I think it's just a slightly different way of thinking about things in terms of where there might be electricity rather than where there's a petrol station. But there are actually more options than you realise if you're not just limiting yourself to fast chargers, basically.
Right, because if you get stuck, if you've got the time, any power point will do.
Exactly.
Or a solar panel.
Yeah. And I would like to talk about your caravan in a moment, but just sticking with the planning, you chose to go clockwise around Australia. Why did you choose that particular route?
Basically, we looked at the kind of weather patterns and the time we had, and leaving Perth around March, which was what our plan was, we knew heading north would be at the tail end of the cyclone season and the wet, so that gives you the best weather up that way. While we're up north in the dry season, you avoid the freezing cold down south. By the time we got down across to like the snowfields and things, we managed to just scrape in and see a little bit of the snow, but it was very much the end of the cold. And then we got across the Nullarbor before it became too hot. So we essentially had 9 to 10 months of perfect weather. I think there was 5 days of rain in the whole time, and there was a little bit of heat, but nothing like the scorching heat that you can get if you pick the wrong season. Sure. So yeah, that just made sense. We could have gone clockwise or anti-clockwise, but the weather made it that choice for us.
Yeah, and the other factor was the WA EV highway going in, and so there were more charging stations that had been completed if we headed north first. Some at the section that was really not yet complete was when you came across the Nullarbor from South Australia and entered back into WA. And so the hope was that if we went north first and followed the good weather, that by the time we got back down to re-enter WA, that some of those last charges would be installed and operational.
Which is a bit of a gamble. I mean, there's not many projects that really finish on time generally, are there? Did it work out?
No.
It did work out.
Right.
But, it did work out, but it wasn't perfect.
Right.
Yes. So there were a number of charges at the more remote northern end that either hadn't quite been commissioned and finished yet, and some that even hadn't been started by the time we got through. The good thing was we were able to discuss with the network Horizon, we're managing those. We got to speak with someone who really looked after us, and we helped them and they helped us by testing and commissioning some of those charges because they hadn't had any EVs come through yet.
Okay.
So that sort of helped us and helped them at the same time. And then there was one of the remote charges that definitely wasn't installed yet, but there was a First Nations campground that they'd set up and they had power.
That exists from their solar panels?
Yep. So we contacted them in advance and said, do you mind if we charge and camp at your place? And they worked out the logistics and said, yeah, no, that's fine. We can accommodate you. Let's go. And
and that was actually a fantastic campground. Like we probably wouldn't have stopped there otherwise, but it was these amazing caves. It was just an immaculate campground set out in a really remote place, and it was actually one of the most amazing nights that we had. And we would have skipped that if we hadn't have stopped and plugged into their solar.
Right. It's interesting, isn't it? Those I think when you're travelling. Those spontaneous moments that often occur because of some particular limitation, because in this case you have to go somewhere to charge, are often the most memorable because you can't plan for those.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Yeah. Now, we've talked about range anxiety a bit, something that has a large impact on that is when you're towing something. And of course, you were towing a caravan around Australia with you, carrying a lot of extra weight. What sort of impact does towing a caravan have on the range that you can expect from your EV?
Yeah, well, that was one, I guess, of the biggest unknowns because there hasn't been a lot of EV towing in the community.
Yeah.
So we didn't have a lot to work with, but I guess my background in a bit of aviation as a hobby helped me come up with a theory that a weight behind a vehicle obviously requires a lot of more energy to accelerate it and bring it up to speed. But a lot of the times when you're towing long distances, you're essentially maintaining a speed. So it's not so much the extra weight that's dragging you behind, it's the aerodynamics of essentially the parachute that you've stuck behind the vehicle. And the bigger and blunter the caravan you've got behind, the much more effort it takes to drag that through the wind. And you definitely notice that with headwinds and things like that. So we purposely chose a camper that was as low profile as possible. So we ended up using an off-road Wayfinder camper that was the roof.
Hybrid,
Yeah, it was hybrid. So the roof electrically lifted or lowered back down. But when it came back down, it was essentially the same height as a car roof. So that reduced a lot of the impact of that parachute behind because it was already slipstreaming behind the vehicle.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's all sorts of other factors of how many bits are hanging off the side to make it dirty through the air. The square back edge of a caravan is also, like trucks, is terrible. That's why you can slipstream behind a truck because it literally sucks all the air behind it and helps out someone behind you. But that adds to your fuel bill. So I ended up putting a wedge boot on the back of the camper to have a trailing edge, much like an aeroplane wing, and that reduces that drag behind and helps with the efficiency going along. So we did a few mods like that, but it's still a significant hit to the range. So the EV9 that we ended up taking around, the Kia EV9, usually around the city gets between about 550 and 600 kilometres.
Mm-hmm.
If you try and cruise at high speed, it drops it more down to about 450 kilometres. But when we put the camper on the back of it, even with the aerodynamic modifications, it dropped the range to, say, 300, but a safe 280 kilometres. So that's kind of the figure that we worked at. But that tied in with what we were trying to achieve, which was the longest distance between the major charging stations across the Nullarbor and across the North End is about 270 kilometres at the moment. So you need to be able to reach at least 270 or have a backup plan of to how you're going to bridge if you can't quite make 270.
Okay. And how long did you carry out those modifications yourself? Was it a months-long project? Was it?
I'd say probably
weekends.
did it. Yeah,
Weekends.
Weekends for about 6 months. There was a fair bit of work and I did all of it myself. I got a little bit of advice and bits and pieces here and there, but I primarily did it myself. I know not everyone could do that, but I'm hoping that new designers of campers, they're starting to get the hint that it's not all about aesthetics or functionality. The aerodynamics whilst towing is a significant factor, and they're bringing that into the consideration as well with the designs. So you're seeing a bit more of the teardrop campers or the low height campers that then expand out once they get to camp.
Okay.
It's interesting though, because when Tim was doing the modifications, we didn't really know how big an impact towing the camper was going to have on our range. So now that we've done it, and it was a lot easier than we anticipated, probably some of the modifications it did weren't actually necessary because, because the range, we got places with a lot less difficulty than we thought may have been the case in advance.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
So we haven't had the time to do those post-tests,
Yeah.
but we suspect that a lot of them weren't necessary and they may have made things a little bit easier in some places, but there's certainly scope for it to be able to be done without serious modifications.
Without spending 6 months of your weekends adjusting the caravan.
Yeah.
So 270 was the sort of minimum that it would need to make.
That work had been done by people before us who had done EV trips without towing anything. And so, we worked off their figures and saw what sort of trips they were doing. And, that's how we got to that figure.
And you were able to do that?
Yes. We comfortably knew that we could do 280 without thinking about it. If you really need it, if there was a headwind or something that was really affecting it, you just had to back off a little bit. But yeah, there were other times that, it made 300 kilometres no problem. So you're sitting pretty at the other end and going, well, that's less charging we have to do.
And when you've got 2 kids in the car, you want to stop after 300 kilometres anyway.
This is true.
Stop and get a snack or go to the toilet, have a play on the playground. So it didn't actually dictate our trip much at all. So often we'd drive the 300 kilometres, you'd end up in a cute little town somewhere. The kids would be at the op shop buying some more books, and the car would be charged before we were ready to move on and keep going. So it worked really well.
So you'd have to rush back to the car to avoid paying the
idle
surcharge.
fee?
The idle fee.
We had that a few times, with the car's ready and the kids are going, we want to play longer. And you're okay, we've got to actually shift the car. It wasn't the other way around, that we were hanging around waiting for the car to charge. That happened a couple of times, but overall in the big scheme of the trip, it was insignificant. Yeah.
No, it's certainly been my experience too. You stay for 45 minutes, an hour to get a full charge at a fast charger. That's less time than you need in most places.
A lot of the charges we were at, you could get, often we'd just go to 80% because that's the efficient part of charging it.
Yeah.
And you do that in 25 minutes, not...
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
25 minutes to 80% and off we go. And of course, the other thing is if you know you're ending up at a caravan park, if you
or
charge
a station
or a station or
wherever
anything,
you are,
like a powered campsite, you know that you can rock up with 60% charge and you've magically got full charge in the morning ready to go.
And we could also draw down on the battery in our camper. So we had solar on the camper roof that would charge the camper battery. And so then we could draw from that as well and top up your car while you're sleeping overnight.
It sounds like it was easier than you were expecting, and we can talk about some areas that were perhaps that was challenging. But do you feel, on the face of it, anyone could do this?
Absolutely. I think now we're past the tipping point where it wasn't possible. The smaller trips are super easy. The big trips are doable with a bit of planning. And I think it's going to start pushing into those really, adventurous type trips that only 1% of travellers even do. But I think there's scope for solar panel drops in the middle of nowhere to provide free power in the middle of somewhere where it's even more difficult to get a fuel drop somewhere. So
yeah, it's interesting. We had a couple of friends doing laps at the same time as us in diesel vehicles, and the amount of planning we were doing and they were doing were not significantly different. And all of them as well had moments where they were worried they were going to run out of diesel. So it wasn't like that it's unique to an EV that you're thinking, I need to plan and make sure I've got enough energy in this vehicle. You need to plan and be mindful of where you're going to get your next fuel source no matter what you're charging your car with.
Do you think in some ways driving an EV just makes you a bit more mindful of the entire process? You were talking about the way that perhaps EVs are influencing caravan design because you're thinking about the power involved in dragging a beautiful big caravan behind you. Do you think it's just you have to become more aware of how you're using the car, where you're driving, how fast you're driving? Because it's one thing that struck me as the owner of an EV is that driving a lot faster burns through the charge a lot more than you expect it would, or chucking the bikes on the back burns through the charge a lot more than you would. It's probably doing that with petrol. It's just I'm not thinking about it.
Exactly. I think if anyone's watching the actual dollars they spend on fuel, and that gets clouded because the price of fuel fluctuates so much, it masks that factor. But definitely this physics is the same no matter which. So you have those kind of problems no matter which way you go. But I also think that the range anxiety that everyone talks about and experiences when they're new to a car, I liken very similar to the fuel anxiety you have when you first start driving. And most people forget when they were P-platers, the number of times people have run out of fuel or panicked because they hit empty and they didn't realize it because they weren't watching that, and then suddenly it becomes an issue. But the more you drive, it doesn't take very long before that's sort of like a process in the back of your head that you forget about and you deal with, but it's not sort of forefront of your mind. And I've found that with an EV, that I had range anxiety at the beginning, and then once you know what's capable, your brain goes, yep, no, that's definitely doable. I'll be able to get that charge. That's fine. I don't even worry about it until we put the trailer on the back. And then you get this whole new lot of range anxiety because all the figures change and you forgot how much it uses. But by the time we finish this trip, again, the other advantage is that technology and the recording of the amount of energy used is so much more accurate. It's not a quarter of a tank, an eighth of a tank, I don't know how thick that needle is as to whether it's empty or not, the percentage of battery that says we didn't go via the guesstimate that it often does because it gets that range calculation wrong depending on headwinds and all those kind of things. But if you actually look at the percentage of the battery and the amount of energy you're instantaneously using, that the calculations were so accurate that we could roll into town with 2%. But we knew it was going to be 2% at the end of the trip, and it's 2% when you roll into town.
Look, the first few legs of the journey, when it was a 2% rolling into town, I was sitting there on my phone calculating things until I was confident. But after the first couple of weeks, and you'd seen that it works out and that the car's giving you accurate data and you could trust that, then that anxiety really fell away. And it actually got to the point that we became a bit complacent about it. The only place that we came anywhere near potentially running out of charge was where there were heaps of charges around, because we'd just gone, it's not an issue anymore, and we stopped paying as much attention.
Yeah, we'll need this, we'll get the next one. Don't worry about this one, we'll get the next one. And then, and then hang on, where is the next one? I didn't really look at it. So.
Well, I look forward to reaching that stage.
You'll get there.
I'd like to talk a bit about worst case scenarios, because we had the experience going down to Margaret River in our EV just after Christmas, in that we usually charge in Bunbury, but thought we'll push on to Bustleton. There was one charger there, and it was a 3-car deep queue. We knew we were going to be there for at least 3 hours. It was 5 p.m. We looked at the guesstimate of the range on the dashboard and thought, we can probably do it. Mm-hmm. But of course, as soon as we hit the open road, it's dropping. And my wife's sitting there in the passenger seat trying to calculate whether it's 50K and whether they're going to make 50K.
Yep.
We had a similar experience before this trip.
Okay.
So the first time we did a long trip, it was only down to Albany. And I think we rolled in on 0%.
Wow.
And it was after midnight. But that was an enormous learning opportunity. And we did that prior to this trip, and it wasn't towing, and it was our early days of being in an EV. But we learned so much from that and have never repeated that. And it just showed us that it was a few little tweaks with planning, and, that problem has evaporated.
Okay. All right. Well, that is reassuring. But I mean, what's with worst case scenario? I mean, what happens if you do turn up into town and the power's out, or the charger's down, or you run out of charge coming back from Uluru, for example? I mean, what happens?
Well, there was one town. What's it called? Pimba. Yeah. So on the way, we're heading up from Port Augusta in South Australia up through to Coober Pedy, and then we're going to go across to Uluru. And there's limited townships and infrastructure out there, so you do have to plan it and know where you can stop. And there was a fast charger at Pimba. And the week before, the power had gone out to the whole community, and it had been out for some time. So not only the car charger, but everything, including the petrol pump. So whether you were in an EV or a diesel petrol car, you could not get past this.
Right, okay.
This was one of the only the 2 times where we were delayed because of the EV charger, and it was because we'd looked at the website telling us when the power was going to be restored. They named a particular date, so we left it to the next day and then went through, and the power had been restored to everything but the car charger. So all it meant was that we had to wait overnight somewhere where we wouldn't have had to otherwise. It wasn't a huge hardship, and we watched a movie with the kids and they had a great time. But
in that particular case, we actually had enough range to divert off the path that we were planning on going out to Roxby Downs, which is a mining town, uranium mining town in the middle of nowhere. That's the only reason it's there. They had a fast charger.
Right.
So it was an 80-kilometre detour, but we got to see a mining uranium mining town that we wouldn't have gone to otherwise, which was just another one of those experiences that once you're out there, you might as well. Got a fast charge from there and came back through the town and continued, and then stopped at a different roadhouse than we were planning to on the way through.
I think there's just that sense of panic, isn't there? Because you run out of fuel and you get the jerry can and someone will bring you some, but you can't carry around a jerry can of electricity. It's just...
Well, you can carry around your battery and your solar panel. So that's your jerry can without someone needing to drop you. And, granted, it's not going to be particularly quick, but you will be able to recharge your car without someone rescuing you. So.
Right.
There is another scenario, which I can foresee in the future, which is that you can tow a dead electric car and you can actually use the regeneration to gain power while you're going. So providing you've got someone with a full car, like a tow service, or that's far enough away that can come and pick you up and then tow you back to a fast charger, you can actually gain part of that charge on the trip back, then disconnect and drive yourself. So there are actually towing advantages, or just different ways of doing towing and rescue that, is still an option. And it might be done in the future. Who knows?
But you haven't had to be towed yet.
No.
In the EV.
No.
It's good.
No.
All that was going through our head, obviously, on the way to Margaret River, going, what actually happens?
Yes.
To the RAC come and tow you? Is that
Most of the time at the moment, it's a flatbed truck, pick you up and then drive you to the nearest fast charger, pick you off, and then you charge up.
And
In
it
our
sounds
case,
embarrassing.
we thought if we got to, and you shouldn't be running out of charge miles from a charger. That just means you haven't planned.
Sure.
So, the realistic scenario is maybe you're 10 Ks out from where you needed to stop, in which case we could have dropped the load off the back and suddenly we would have doubled our range.
Right.
And could have gone and picked it up later.
That was definitely plan B.
Yeah.
But we thought if we get to anywhere that headwinds catch us or inclinations that we weren't expecting, elevation climbs, etc., if you get to the point where the calculations say you're not going to make it, exactly what Renee said, you drop the camper off the side of the road. Either the kids do their schoolwork on the side of the road, you drive that last bit with double the range because you don't have the parachute behind you, do your fast charge and come back. It would have taken half an hour out of your day, which on a holiday trip is neither here nor there.
Okay, so ways around it. Well, what were some of the other main challenges or tense moments on the road?
Probably the only other real challenge. Tim has a higher risk appetite than me. I am the voice of reason.
Very interesting way to put that. High risk appetite.
The vehicle that we took was really capable off-road. It outdid a lot of the four-wheel drives on dunes and things like this. Its limitation was its clearance. So it was a bit lower than what you would have for most vehicles. And that was nothing to do with being an EV. It's just the way it was designed, and it was the car that was available when we did the trip. But there were a couple of places where the terrain was probably a little bit rougher than I would have liked. And I had concerns about, if we, completely bottom out on a big rock and we're out in the middle of nowhere, in rural communities, there's still not a lot of comfort from mechanics around dealing with an EV.
Yep.
I was always saying, let's not risk it because we still have our whole trip to go. Let's not ruin the vehicle, trying to get down this track. Whereas Tim would very much have been, let's just give it a go. So they were the tense points when we were deciding whether or not that particular route was really worth our while. And
there were a few river crossings and things that I was willing to push the boundaries a little bit, but we hadn't got an official water wading depth from Kia, and we were sort of pushing them for those figures so we knew what it was designed for. You can certainly design EVs to be 100% waterproof. There's an example of someone converted a Land Cruiser to electric and drove under the Darwin Harbour. And so it was, 11 or 12 kilometres or something completely underwater.
Wow, very James Bond.
Yes. So EVs can be made waterproof and able to cross no matter what, but we hadn't had that figure, and we didn't get the figure until after all these water crossings, and it was probably wise not to have pushed it at that point.
Okay.
The only other tense points, I guess, where we thought was an issue was people's attitude towards charging, because, as you know, any power point anywhere in the world can be an EV charging point, but there's a little bit of apprehension when people don't know. They know that there's lots of power involved with an EV, and so they're scared that lot of power has to be instantaneously and can blow their little generator or blow their circuit breakers or anything like that. Whereas if you know what you're doing, it's like turning on a tap. You don't open up a fire hydrant if you've got a little hose. You turn it on appropriately.
Fellow campers, often we'd turn up at a campsite, particularly in a national park, and you'd set up and there'd be a few other people scattered around, and inevitably, usually while we were trying to set up, people would come over and want to chat about it because, it was very obvious that our setup was different. We intentionally had number plates that identified it as electric, but just the camper looked a bit different. And so people would be very curious, particularly those people that had challenged their preconceived ideas around, EVs and their capabilities for off-road.
Exactly what you said before, where people go, yeah, but it's not really fully electric, is it? It's like a hybrid. No, it's twin electric motor. There is no other option. It's just electric and batteries. And I think those kind of experiences of the two different types of people that were there, those who knew EVs were possible and they either had an EV at home but they just bought a diesel for this trip because they didn't think it was possible to do it, or, as Renee said, they had preconceived notions that were just reality was a bit of a rift for them because they didn't expect it to be there because they thought it wasn't possible. But the vast majority of people were just curious that how can it be done, not this shouldn't be done, you shouldn't be here sort of thing. Once they actually saw it, there's no way of saying it can't be done. And then they started asking questions of, oh, what happens in this scenario? Or, how'd you do this? And that kind of thing. So
our 8-year-old son, I think he can pretty much word for word answer the frequently asked questions because, you know, there was the standard questions that people wanted to know, and it was all around how much range, how long does it take you to charge, all of those questions that were every single time you stopped somewhere, people would want to know the answers to. And in general, people were just really interested.
Yeah. So he's become a little EV evangelist.
Yes.
It is interesting. Even when we bought ours, I wasn't sure it would have enough power. We looked at getting a tow bar, and can you get a tow bar on an EV? Are you allowed to do that?
A few of the diehard campers that were really impressed with their setup, and they're sort of talking, but it's an EV, doesn't have a lot of power. But the EV9 with the twin motor has a little bit more power and significantly more torque than a V8 Land Cruiser. And so they were going, hang on a minute. And it's everything about it as a towing vehicle is amazing because the center of gravity is really low. There's no noise. You don't get that missed gears or the needing to wind up the turbo or anything. It just does whatever you want it to do. And it will climb up a hill with a trailer on the back faster than a car without towing.
It's true.
So it's quite an amazing experience.
Let's talk a bit more about the amazing parts. So we've talked a bit about the stressful aspects, and I did note that Renee's stressful aspects were all to do with you breaking or sinking the car, Tim, whereas yours were sort of technical. What were some of the pleasant surprises on the way? What were some of the moments of wonder?
One of the ones that really struck out to me, which was a nice little moment, the kids and I were camping just for a small section. She had ducked out and we were on our own. We pulled up at a state forest in New South Wales, and it was the kind of place we love being, just trees everywhere, very few campers scattered around this area, and then just lots of bushlands, birds chirping, etc. And everyone was either tenting or with small campers, and it was brilliant. And then right towards the end of the night, someone rocked up with a really large caravan, dragged out a generator, put the generator as far away from them as they could because it's annoying, and ran a long extension cord, started up the generator and just ruined the atmosphere of all the birds chirping. But I had plenty of power in our camper. We were fully self-sufficient because of the solar we'd collected during the day. So I just wandered over them and said, you obviously want some power. Would you like me to provide it for you? And using the vehicle to load, we plugged their caravan into our car instead of the generator. And so for the whole night, they had their power and the air conditioner, everything they wanted. And we all had a nice quiet campground. And it cost me 2% of the battery.
Amazing.
And so that's the kind of thing you can do where you've got so much power in the car, a lot more than you need for the camping aspect. So the car would probably run the camper for a couple of weeks. That's the kind of power levels that you're talking about.
Just going back to the technical aspect, you talked about the WA EV charging network being a key part of your plan. I mean, how did it actually stack up for you in the end?
The DC fast chargers made life very easy because, as we said, 20 to 25 minutes to charge up to 80% meant that you could plan those kind of stops whilst you went to the information centre, because they're often right near the info centre. So everyone rocks up into town, wants to find out what's going on, goes to the info centre for 15 to 20 minutes. The car's already charged and done, ready to go. So it helped eliminate even having to worry about energy management from that point of view. And the other thing it enabled us to do was we could off-grid camp halfway between fast charger stops. So you could camp overnight with no grid, no ability to charge off a powered campsite at all. You could go to those really remote places. And then the next day as you're travelling, stop at lunchtime at the fast charger and then have your lunch, 20 minutes, carry on to the next campground without having to worry about, I have to camp at a campground that has powered sites or anything like that. So it made it easier from that sense, but certainly not necessary, because if you were going to spend 2 nights at a caravan or pay like a station or anywhere, a campsite that had power, you can get your power from 2 nights of a standard power point anyway. It's just trickle charging. So yeah, the fast chargers are definitely a great option for when you want to do long, big trips, like some long, fast trips. But if you're backing off the pace or you're going somewhere for a long period of time, like a week's holiday, they're not as necessary.
Do you know how much you spent in total?
Our 37,000 kilometre trip cost us $2,440 in electricity charges. And we worked out the equivalent of most sort of diesels around that size is anywhere from about probably $12,000 to $17,000.
Wow.
So it was well over a $10,000 saving on this kind of
That's
trip.
a European holiday.
Yes, exactly.
But while they're cheap to run, they're still not cheap to access, are they? There is that upfront investment. You see that as something that is improving, that they are going to be more
almost
accessible
on
to
a
everyone?
monthly basis.
Yeah.
I mean, you can now get MGs and Auras and things like that under $35,000. In fact, I know someone who bought an MG the other day was under $30,000. So you're starting to get price comparison already with those kind of cars. And yes, we were on the top end with the four-wheel drive, but it was also significantly less than the top end of the V8 Land Cruisers and things like that. So price parity for what we had as a semi-off-road vehicle was actually not far off comparable with what people pay for diesel 4x4s to do this kind of trip anyway. The cost of the battery is one of the main ones, and I think the figures at the moment are about every 18 months they're halving. So you're seeing that significant cost of EVs dropping, and that's not stopping at the moment. And the other thing to consider is maintenance. Like a number of people that we know that did those kind of trips are spending $3,000 or $4,000 for maintenance on the way, the number of oil changes and filter changes and things you've got to do. And ours was $700 over 3 years. So that's like $200 in maintenance for the trip as well. So you've got significant maintenance costs. If you think of the life of a vehicle, that almost brings it better than parity already, and things are only going to get cheaper from here.
If we are getting easier access to these vehicles, if they are becoming cheaper, if more people can drive them, is the EV network able to keep up with that demand? I mean, I have had the experience of pulling in at Bustleton and having 3 cars in the way. I mean, is that going to become more of an issue?
It has a potential of being an issue, but I think it has easily mitigated, because a lot of people talk about the fast chargers, but the fast chargers are only needed for long distance trips and where you don't have charging options as a destination overnight. So what I think you're going to see is a lot more accommodation providing power options overnight, which will eliminate the need for a lot of DC fast charging. And I guess a little bit of the etiquette of people understanding that if you only fast charge to 80%, it's a significant less time waiting, so the queues aren't going to be as significant. I'm sure when petrol cars first started coming out to Australia and there were 15 petrol stations around the place, I remember as a kid there used to be rosters and things like that. And
That's true, yes.
So the way that things get utilised is going to have to change. And with supply and demand, it's a chicken and the egg. But I think they're both moving in the right direction as they go.
So Renée, having done this trip and everything that went into planning it and making the journey itself, I mean, what's one bit of advice you'd give to someone who says it's not possible, or someone who just wants to follow in your tyre tracks?
Doing some trial runs so that you get used to your setup, you get to know your vehicle, and have some confidence in it. It's the best way to get an indication of how it's going to go on your big trip. So I would just say do some of those little ones first, iron out any of the problems, so that when you do head off on your big trip, it's a success and isn't a huge stress for everybody.
What's next? Do you see yourselves doing another trip like this?
I very much think so. I don't have any leave anymore at the moment.
That's probably long service leave needed first.
Probably something that's adding a bit of time to our plans. But yeah, we definitely have some plans for replacing the weekend trips and the Easter holidays and those kind of things with the same setup we've had, because we really enjoy the ease of it, the quietness of the setup. It's kind of like glamping. I mean, the Caravan was kitted out with a microwave, air conditioner, induction cooktop stoves, electric blankets. It's more glamping than camping sort of thing. So
The people that you met, that you allow them to switch off their generator and run their caravan, those people you met along the way, do you feel that they're going to pass this forward, that they have taken a lesson from meeting you guys on the road?
Oh, indefinitely. I think there was lots of people that we met that, either had their preconceived myths busted or had been given the confidence to say they can do it. One example I do remember is our kids were obviously meet other kids in the campground after we were set up, and we sort of got chatting with another family, and the dad sort of sidled up to me and said, just quietly, I'm a bit embarrassed because we've got an EV at home, but we bought this brand new diesel to do this trip. And the kids were niggling me at the start, going, why can't we take the EV on the trip or do it in electric? And he said, nah, it can't be done. And then as we rolled into the campsite, the kids in the back going, Dad, you said it couldn't be done. So, yeah.
We are friends with them now. But
Right. Despite showing him up.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think that's a matter of what it was about, to just say someone had to take some of the first steps. We're not the only ones, but the more people do it, the more you realise there are options and it can be done. And we help those who want to progress along the same path.
Renée and Tim McLennan, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in. If you liked this episode, let us know and share it with a friend. Don't forget to hit subscribe, and we'll catch you in the next episode of RAC's Horizons podcast.